The story of William and Myrtle Walsh. Well, mostly William. William Joseph Walsh was born in 1901 to Irish immigrants William and Mary Marie. William Sr. was from Leeds, Kent, England, where he met and married Marie, who hailed from Galway, Ireland. William Sr. was known as a hard-working man, and along with his strong-minded new bride, they decided to immigrate to America in the late 1800s. After a short while working in Midwestern rail yards, they saved enough to open a small farm and grocery store in Chicago, Illinois. It was there that Bill, the oldest, and his 3 brothers and 2 sisters were born and raised through most of their lives, going to school and working at the Walsh's feed and grocery. Bill Jr. became a standout athlete, excelling in baseball, which rankled his father, and so he was forced to quit, so he could spend more time in the family business. In his teens, he was forced to quit high school altogether as his father's illness made it necessary for him to run the family store. Bill, an avid reader, made it his life's passion to educate himself by visiting the library and reading anything he could get his hands on. He secretly promised that he would make something of himself. As time passed, Bill's parents moved the store out of the city and into a new community called Chicago Ridge, right around the time it incorporated in 1914. The move was a positive one for Bill, who convinced his parents to eventually sell the store to a local grocer and village trustee in 1916. And he took a job with the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, first as a gravedigger and eventually working his way up to foreman. But it was Bill's chance meeting the new store owner and local politician, Charles Polchow, that stirred his interest in politics. Along with his gift of gab from working with store customers and natural leadership, he began to understand from his management role at the cemetery. He started to turn his focus on the community. Around that time, a beautiful young lady came to visit her aunts in Chicago Ridge, and the rest is history. Along with her mother, Lydia, Myrtle Gladys Shaw was to spend the summer visiting her 3 aunts, Mary Fitzgerald, Lucy, and Lynette. Bill's work as a newly elected Democratic chairman brought him to the Fitzgerald home, and a chance meeting and the introduction to Myrtle began a romance for the ages. Myrtle never returned to Wisconsin, and instead Bill and Myrtle were married 6 months later. Bill continued to be promoted at the cemetery, and he poured himself into local politics and his passion for helping others in the hopes that his community would flourish. In the meantime, he and Myrtle bought a modest home and brought Bill's parents in to live with them. Soon they began their family in 1923. Dolores was born. Everyone called her Dee, and she became the apple of Bill and Myrtle's eye. By 1927, their second child, Innes, my grandfather, was born. Just 1 year later, Bill Walsh III was born, and like all of Bill and Myrtle's kids, he went on to accomplish great things in the world. Soon, at what would be the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929, they had their 4th child, Eileen. Myrtle said she was the hope and the beauty this world needs right now. Still, the world was changing, and it seemed no family was free from the devastation the stock market crash brought with it. Bill continued his volunteer work with the village, trying to help others in the community, but lost his job as manager and worked only when the cemetery called for him. Soon he was forced to move his entire family, parents, and all to live with Myrtle's aunt, who also was the kid's school teacher. This was a very difficult decision for such an accomplished, proud man, but Bill had faith that things would work out. While taking any job he could find, Bill continued to help others less fortunate and focus on educating himself through reading and community service. He played an integral role in keeping the village and its constituents hopeful and focused on the most needy families. He poured himself into his work as trustee and eventually became Justice of the Peace. As Democratic Committee Chairman, he worked with local leaders to help those families most in need. Several years later, as the news of the New Deal came along, struggling Americans slowly began to find work, and the hope of normalcy set in. By 1936, unemployment began to fall, and Bill was able to get back in with the cemetery as manager. But it wasn't until 1940, the same year his father passed, that Bill was able to afford his own home for his family again. It was a good thing, too, because Patricia, their 5th child, came along that summer. Soon after they moved into their new bungalow, Myrtle, at the age of 36, began to experience pain and fatigue, which eventually became more and more prevalent. By this time, Dee and the boys were going to school and working odd jobs and helping their mother out. Bill stayed on top of his work in Chicago Ridge politics and was given several citations honoring his effort helping his neighbors in the community. In 1945, Bill was elected as the youngest village president of Chicago Ridge and spent 7 years spearheading the fastest growing community in the Chicagoland suburbs, focusing on building schools, libraries, and parks and recreation. Unfortunately, during this time it was determined that Myrtle was suffering from severe rheumatoid arthritis, a crippling disease at the time that had her walking with a cane by 40 and confined to a wheelchair by the time she was just 45 years old. Bill watched over his bride as his kids went on to high school and put themselves through night school college. After 7 years, Bill left the village presidency and immediately became president of the Board of Education. But of all his amazing accomplishments, he was most proud of bringing baseball, a sport he was forced to give up as a kid, to Chicago Ridge. In 1952, he formed the Chicago Ridge Little League. Neighbors said he spent more time watching the kids play than his favorite Chicago White Sox. "Fields are built, uniforms are sewn. Let's play ball," he said, as the gravel landed.